Friday looked like just a comedy. But behind the cameras, the crew was filming on a block where wearing the wrong color could get you hurt. There were real gang members on the set. There were warnings nobody could ignore. The houses you see on screen were not movie sets at all. They were the actual homes of the people who made the film. Two men sitting in the background of one famous scene were not even extras. What happened during those 20 days of shooting in 1995 was very different from what audiences ever knew. In 1994, Ice Cube was sitting in the basement of his record label, Street Knowledge, with his longtime producer, DJ Pooh. They had spent years watching Hollywood turn South Central into a place of non-stop pain. First came Colors in 1988, then Boys and the Hood in 1991, where Cube himself starred. After that came Menace II Society in 1993. Again and again, the same picture showed up on screen. Funerals, drive-by shootings, sirens, blood, mothers crying over caskets. Cube had reached a point where he was tired of seeing his neighborhood reduced to that. He understood the violence. He knew the block could be rough. Still, that was never the whole story. He also remembered how funny life could be there, how strange people were, how ridiculous whole afternoons could become for no reason at all. He and his friends had spent years laughing at the neighborhood, reacting to it, getting caught up in the small madness of everyday life. Nobody in Hollywood seemed interested in filming that side of South Central, and that gap stayed with him. Out of that feeling came the real idea for Friday. Cube and Pooh had grown up around the same streets and the same kinds of people. So once they started talking, the memories came fast. They remembered the freeloader on the corner. They remembered the bully who snatched your bike. They remembered the pastor with wandering eyes. They remembered the crackhead who might fake a slip and fall just to sue a store. The more they talked, the more they laughed, and soon the movie started taking shape from those shared memories. As Pooh later put it, every hood had somebody like Debo or Felicia. By then, Cube had already tried writing scripts. The first was called America Eats Its Young. The second was Faux Life, which he later described as a hard story about hood life and prison. Neither one got anywhere. He had only started writing scripts because John Singleton told him he should. Singleton had a simple point. If Cube could write songs so vivid that people could see the scenes in their heads, then he could write a movie too. So Friday became his third shot, and the influences behind it were a surprise. The mood did not come from dark crime films. It came from watching Cheech and Chong, from the comedy energy of In Living Color, and from Robert Townsend's Hollywood Shuffle, the 1987 film Townsend had funded by maxing out his own credit cards. That story stuck with Cube. At one point, he thought he might have to do the same thing. He even bought a computer with that plan in mind. Then, right when things seemed close, Friday almost disappeared. Cube had also written a sports movie called Defense, and that project was supposed to go first. At the same time, F. Gary Gray, who would later direct Friday, had moved on to another project called Rollin' 80s. Then both films collapsed. Looking back, Gray has said he is glad they did, because either one could have changed the course of his whole career. Once those projects fell apart, the path opened for Friday. Without that twist, there is no Smokey, no Debo, no Big Worm, and no line the world would later repeat for decades. Eventually, New Line Cinema picked up the script, which meant Cube no longer had to think about funding it with credit cards. The studio agreed to back the film for about $3.5 million, though Cube later said the real production budget was even tighter. In a 2021 tweet, while defending himself against claims that the cast had been underpaid, he put the budget at $2.3 million and said the movie was shot in only 20 days. Either way, the money was thin and the schedule was tight. By Hollywood standards, this was a very small film. Even so, the studio had one major note, and that note struck right at the center of Cube's vision. Cube had wanted DJ Pooh to play Smokey. Pooh was not a trained actor and had never appeared on a movie screen before, which was exactly why Cube liked him for the part. He wanted the neighborhood to feel real. He wanted the audience to feel like they were standing on the block with real people, not watching polished actors perform. New Line did not go for that idea. The studio wanted a comedian with screen presence. Cube was still annoyed about that choice decades later. In a 2023 interview on Big Boy Off Air, he said he had wanted the film to feel natural and lived in. He believed Pooh could have done that because audiences had never seen him in a movie before. Still, the studio was paying for the film, so the decision held. Pooh moved into a smaller role as Red, the guy whose chain and bicycle Debo keeps taking, and now they had to find a new Smokey. Some big names entered the conversation. Tommy Davidson, already a star from In Living Color, was considered. Chris Rock, who had already been on Saturday Night Live and was building his stand-up career, was considered too. Either one would have changed the movie in a major way. Cube and Pooh, though, had somebody else in mind. They had been watching Def Comedy Jam on HBO, where a new generation of black comics was breaking through, and one young comedian stood out to them. He was skinny, loud, wild, and totally unpredictable. His name was Chris Tucker. He had done a small role in House Party 3 in 1994, and they wanted him badly enough to push his name to the studio. New Line agreed to a screen test, and that first test went badly. According to F. Gary Gray, Tucker was awful in the first audition. Gray said so plainly in the complex oral history about the movie, and some people in the room were ready to move on right then. Tucker, though, did something that changed everything. Instead of giving up, he went looking for help. He reached out to Angela Means, who had already been cast as Felicia, because she studied under a respected acting coach in Los Angeles. Tucker wanted to take a class, but Means offered something more personal. She invited him to her apartment for a dinner workshop. They sat there with plates of spaghetti and ran scenes together. He kept working. He kept trying. She watched the role begin to click inside him. Later, she remembered that by the time the spaghetti was gone, Chris was Smokey. When Tucker came back for the second audition, he nailed it. He got the role. He also got paid almost nothing. In a 2021 interview on Club Shay Shay, Tucker said his salary was about $10,000. He did not seem bitter about it, because at that point, he wanted the opportunity more than anything else. That small check turned into the best investment of his career once the film made over $27 million worldwide. Cube also had final say on the director, and he did not use that power to pick an industry veteran. He picked 23-year-old F. Gary Gray, a music video director with no feature film credits at all. Friday would be his first movie. Cube trusted him for a very direct reason. Gray had grown up on the same streets the story came from. He was not studying that world from a distance. He had lived there. That connection shaped the whole production. Gray grew up on 126th Street between Halldale and Normandy in south-central Los Angeles, and when it came time to find locations, he did not need scouts to explain the neighborhood to him. He drove people around and pointed to the houses himself. Many of the homes in the film belonged to his real childhood friends and neighbors. The house from the flashback where Debo punches Red so hard he flies backward was Gray's own childhood home. DJ Pooh brought that same personal history. The house used as Smokey's mother's place, across from Craig's house, was the house Pooh had grown up in. So when Smokey steps out that front door early in the movie, he is stepping out of the same house tied to one of the writer's real childhood memories. That feeling of place in Friday came from something very solid. The neighborhood was not recreated. It was there. That closeness to the real block also brought real danger. In 1995, 126th Street sat deep in Crip territory. The Crips, widely known for the color blue, had been in conflict with the Bloods, who were tied to red for more than 20 years. Walking onto that block in red clothing could get somebody hurt. Before cast and crew even arrived, they were warned clearly not to wear red. No red shirts, no red shoes, no red hats, nothing. That warning shaped the look of the movie in a way many viewers never realize. Smokey wears blue. Debo spends the film in a blue plaid shirt. Mrs. Parker wears blue shorts. Megan Good, who appears very briefly in the background as a child, wears blue overalls and a blue hat. The wardrobe was not just style, it was caution. Even with that care, the set still got tense. More than one cast member later said that 2 real gang members had a problem with the production filming on their block. They would not cooperate during one scene, and the filmmakers had to talk their way through the problem. Some people who were there have suggested the shoot kept moving because Ice Cube and DJ Pooh had real respect in that neighborhood and could speak for the project. For 20 straight days, the production had to stay aware of the actual street life around it. That thin line between the movie and the real world shows up on screen. In the lowrider scene with Smokey and Hector, 2 men can be seen sitting on a wall in the background. Multiple sources have said those men were not extras at all. They were just people from the neighborhood who happened to be there during filming. In moments like that, the film and the block were almost the same thing. Then there is the most famous line in the whole movie, which did not even exist in the script. "Bye, Felicia" was improvised on set. Angela Means has said this clearly many times. In a 2015 interview with Vibe, she explained that Ice Cube said it in response to what she was giving him in the scene. The moment felt right, the mood carried it, and they kept going. Cube has said something similar. In a 2015 interview with Rolling Stone for the film's 20th anniversary, he called it a throwaway line. That is what makes its later life so strange. A quick little line, tossed off in the moment, turned into one of the most famous dismissals in popular culture. Over time, it spread far beyond the movie. It ended up on shirts. It became a meme. It entered political talk. Even Hillary Clinton said it. Along the way, the spelling changed in popular use from Felicia with an SH to Felicia with a C, because people were copying the sound, not checking the credits. Then, 20 years later, Straight Outta Compton included a callback. That film was also directed by F. Gary Gray. In one scene, a woman named Felicia gets pushed out of a hotel room by Ice Cube's character, who in that film was played by Cube's real son, O'Shea Jackson Jr. The line, "Bye, Felicia," was improvised there too. Gray later said O'Shea dropped it on the spot late at night during a long shoot. So the most famous line from Friday was improvised once in the original movie, and then improvised again 2 decades later by the next generation of the same family. Improvisation helped shape much more than that one moment. A lot of the dialogue people still quote from Friday was never fully written on the page. John Witherspoon, who played Craig's father, Mr. Jones, had a huge amount of freedom on set. His comic voice filled the movie with lines that felt too alive to have been carefully typed out beforehand. The bathroom warning, the dog catcher story, that whole fatherly pressure he brought to Craig. Much of that came from Witherspoon, working in the moment, and the camera staying ready for it. Chris Tucker did the same thing once he fully found Smokey. Some of the lines most attached to that character came straight from Tucker's own timing and energy. The talk about weed coming from the earth, the complaints about messing up the rotation, the famous way he twists "the older the berry, the sweeter the juice," only to get corrected by Cube. Even the last line of the movie, when Smokey breaks the fourth wall, lights a joint, looks into the camera, and says he was just kidding, came from Tucker. That helps explain why the movie still feels so fresh after all these years. A lot of it does not sound trapped inside a script. It sounds like real people finding funny moments in real time. Gray was smart enough to let that happen and keep filming while it did. The movie also quietly captured two future stars right before their careers took off. Most people never notice either one. The first was Michael Clarke Duncan. Years later, he would play John Coffey in The Green Mile and earn an Academy Award nomination. He would appear in major films like Armageddon and become one of the most recognizable black character actors of his era. Back in 1995, he was just an uncredited extra in Friday. Officially, he appears as a craps player during the black and white flashback where Red confronts Debo about the stolen bike. His role on set, though, went beyond that tiny appearance. Meagan Good later said Duncan worked as Tiny Lister's stand-in. While the crew adjusted lighting and camera positions for Debo's scenes, Duncan would stand in the spot where Lister would later be. In that strange way, he spent time physically holding the place of one of the movie's most unforgettable characters. A few years later, he was acting alongside Tom Hanks. The second future star was Meagan Good. She was 13 years old during Friday, and her role is so small that many viewers miss her completely. She plays one of the children Smokey pushes past while hurrying toward the ice cream truck to deal with Big Worm. She is there only briefly, with no famous lines and no major attention. Then, within a year, she landed a recurring role on Moesha. By the 2000s, she had become a leading actress in films like Stomp the Yard, Think Like a Man, and the Anchorman sequel. So, tucked inside this small neighborhood comedy is a tiny early moment from a girl who would grow into a star. After Friday changed everything, the most surprising twist in the franchise did not happen on screen. It happened when Chris Tucker walked away. Once the first film hit, Tucker's career took off fast. He did not just become popular, he became one of the biggest stars in Hollywood. By the time Rush Hour 3 arrived in 2007, he was reportedly earning $25 million per movie. From 1995 to 2007, his rise was almost straight up, and Friday was where that rise began. So when Next Friday started coming together near the end of the decade, bringing Smokey back felt like the easiest choice in the world. Everyone wanted it. Ice Cube wanted it. The studio wanted it. The audience definitely wanted it. Smokey was one of the main reasons people loved the first movie so much, and Tucker's chemistry with Cube was one of the most quoted parts of the whole film. Cube later said publicly that Tucker was going to be paid somewhere between $10 and $12 million to return as Smokey in Next Friday. For the first movie, he had only earned $10,000. That jump was enormous. On paper, there was no reason to refuse, but Tucker refused. For a long time, people assumed he had simply moved on. He was making bigger movies, earning bigger checks, and did not seem interested in looking back. Then, piece by piece, the fuller story came out. In a 2021 interview with All Urban Central, Tucker said one real reason he passed on the sequel was the weed. He did not want to keep representing everybody smoking weed on screen. He even admitted he had forgotten he once explained it that way until someone brought it up years later. At the core of it, he just did not want to keep playing that version of the character. Then, Ice Cube backed that up in December 2021. He posted on Twitter that they really were ready to pay Tucker $10 to $12 million for Next Friday. But Tucker turned it down for religious reasons. He no longer wanted to cuss or smoke weed on camera. That choice makes more sense once you know where Tucker came from. He had been raised Pentecostal in the Church of God in Christ. His parents, Mary Louise and Norris Tucker, were deeply religious, and even though fame pulled him away from that world for a while in the mid-1990s, the break did not last. By the late 1990s, Tucker had moved back to Atlanta, returned to church, and become a born-again Christian. After that, Smokey no longer felt like a role he could comfortably play. The cussing, the weed, the womanizing, the drug dealing, all of it clashed with where his life had gone. So he turned the money down. Then he turned it down again when Friday After Next came around in 2002. That was $12 million left on the table because he did not want to go back to smoking weed on screen. And the effect of that choice never really disappeared. Ice Cube has said more than once that the franchise lost something important without Tucker. He believes audiences never connected to the sequels in quite the same way, because Smokey was missing. Tucker, though, has stayed at peace with the decision. In a 2014 interview with the Georgia Straight, he said being a Christian actually made comedy harder for him. He explained that many comedians reach for cussing and raunchy material because it comes easy, while he had to work harder and dig deeper to find something funny without leaning on that. For him, that challenge mattered. Then there is Tommy "Tiny" Lister Jr., whose real-life story was almost as striking as Debo himself. Lister was born on June 24, 1958, in Pine Bluff, Arkansas, and he came into the world with a detached and deformed retina in his right eye. For nearly his whole life, he was basically blind in that eye. It drooped in a way people could not ignore, and over time that became part of the look that made him so unforgettable on camera. What might have held someone else back ended up becoming part of his identity. Before acting, Lister built himself as an athlete. In 1982, he became the NCAA Division II National Shot Put Champion. He also won a U.S. national title in shot put, with a throw of more than 61 feet 8 inches. Cal State LA, where he went to school, still holds a yearly track meet in his name. From there, he moved into professional wrestling and then acting, and along the way, he picked up the role of Zeus in the 1989 film No Holds Barred. He played the huge, silent threat opposite Hulk Hogan, and that role carried over into appearances on WWF television. For a while, Lister became one of the most visible monster villains on wrestling TV, so when he was cast as Debo in Friday, it felt perfect. At the same time, the role still did not fully capture what his presence could do. Lister was not just physically big. He had the kind of energy that made people around him tense up. After Lister died, Ice Cube wrote about him on Twitter and called him America's favorite bully. He also said Lister was a born entertainer who could slip into character instantly, scare people both on and off camera, and then flash a huge smile and laugh right after. Cube ended that tribute by thanking him for being a good dude at heart. Years later, Lister's story took a darker turn. On August 31, 2012, he agreed to plead guilty in a mortgage fraud conspiracy that federal prosecutors said caused $3.8 million in losses. It had nothing to do with Friday, but it became part of the public story that followed him through the rest of his life. He died on December 10, 2020, at the age of 62. Early reports suggested possible complications tied to COVID-19, though the full autopsy details were never clearly made public. Within hours of the news, Debo was trending on Twitter. Even after all those years, people were mourning the character's name as much as the man himself, which says a lot about how fully Debo had taken over Lister's public identity. Bernie Mac's part in Friday was much smaller, but he made every second of it count. He played Pastor Clever, the slick neighborhood pastor trying to seduce Mrs. Parker right outside Craig's house. The role only lasted a few minutes, yet Bernie turned it into one of the funniest moments in the whole film. The scene builds fast. Pastor Clever slips into Mrs. Parker's house, her tiny husband comes home, and suddenly the whole thing explodes into chaos as the husband, played by Tony Cox, chases the pastor down the street and throws a brick at his car, while James Brown's "Get On Up" plays in the background. It is quick, wild, and unforgettable. At that time, Bernie Mac was still on his way up. In 1995, he had stand-up experience and some recognition in Chicago, but he was not yet the huge national name he would become. Friday gave him an early spotlight in front of a much bigger audience. Then, his rise came fast. By 2000, he was one of the stars of the original Kings of Comedy. By 2001, he had his own sitcom. By 2002, he was on the cover of Time. When people look back, it is easy to trace a line from that short Pastor Clever scene to the major comedy career that followed. Bernie Mac died on August 9, 2008, at the age of 50 from complications related to sarcoidosis. After Friday, he only had about 13 more years in the business, but in that short stretch, he became one of the most loved comedians of his era. The making of Friday itself adds even more to its legend. The movie was shot in just 20 days, and everything about the production reflected the size of the budget. A lot of scenes were filmed on real porches, in real backyards, in working-class South Central neighborhoods. People who lived there would come outside and watch the filming, and some even ended up appearing as background extras. That same real world also slipped into the sound. The children playing, the dogs barking, the lawnmowers in the distance, none of that was carefully added later. It was everyday life bleeding into the movie. When Friday opened on April 26, 1995, through New Line Cinema, it made $6,589,341 on its first weekend. That was enough for a number 2 debut at the U.S. box office, sitting behind Bad Boys, which had opened a couple weeks earlier. Even that opening was already a win because the movie had essentially doubled its budget right away. Then it kept going. In North America, it eventually earned $27,467,564. Against a production budget that topped out around $3.5 million, that meant the return was close to 8 times the cost. Critics did not fully know what to do with it at first. The professional response was mixed, and the 77% Rotten Tomatoes score reflected that. The real power of the movie showed up with audiences instead. Its audience score reached 91%, and that is where the story becomes clear. Regular moviegoers, especially in Black communities, did not just enjoy Friday. They adopted it. They watched it again and again. They repeated the lines at parties, at school, and at work. They turned the dialogue into part of daily speech. That impact reached even filmmakers. Quentin Tarantino later named Friday as one of his 20 favorite films released between 1992 and 2009. That list was real and published, and it placed Friday beside films like Battle Royale, Anything Else, and Boogie Nights. For a movie made in 20 days on a tiny budget in South Central, that kind of praise showed just how far its reputation had grown. And the reach of Friday did not stay inside film. It spread far beyond that. In the NFL, 2 different players ended up tied to the name Debo. James Harrison, the fierce all-pro linebacker for the Pittsburgh Steelers, was called Debo because of the way he hit people. Then there was Debo Samuel, the Pro Bowl receiver drafted by the San Francisco 49ers in 2019, who had gone by Debo since he was a kid. At that point, the name had moved so far into culture that it felt almost official. That same ripple showed up in music too. In 2024, Kendrick Lamar released Not Like Us, the diss track aimed at Drake that became one of the biggest hip-hop moments of the decade. Inside the song, Kendrick referenced DeMar DeRozan, whose nickname is also Debo. The line clearly pointed back to the Friday character, and with it, Kendrick tapped into that image of control, fear, and block-level dominance. Almost 30 years after the film came out, Debo was still the symbol people reached for when they wanted to describe raw power. Then, in April 2026, the Los Angeles Rams leaned into that same legacy with a draft promo video called Thursday. The video was filmed outside the real house from the original movie. It featured O'Shea Jackson Jr., who had played his father Ice Cube in Straight Outta Compton, Chris Tucker's son Destin, Terry Crews as Debo, and Rams players including Kevin Dotson as Big Worm. 3 decades later, the movie was still being used as living pop culture material, and people were still instantly getting the joke. Not every attempt to expand the franchise worked that well, though. In 2007, MTV2 launched Friday, the animated series. It was meant to take the world of the films and reshape it for a different generation. Instead, it lasted only 8 episodes. It never caught on, and it was quietly canceled. A lot of fans of the original movies still have no idea it even existed. That makes it one of the strangest corners of the whole Friday universe. A real attempt at growth that the audience simply did not follow. The story of the franchise still feels unfinished. A 4th live-action movie, usually called Last Friday, has been in development for years. As of 2026, it still has not been made. Ice Cube has said the project is stuck in legal limbo with Warner Brothers, which acquired New Line Cinema in 2008 and took control of the franchise rights. Cube has spoken openly about wanting those rights back so he can make the film on his own. But for now, the studio still holds the property. That delay has become more painful with time because key members of the original cast are gone now. John Witherspoon, who would have returned as Mr. Jones, died on October 29, 2019, at age 77 before the 4th film could happen. Tommy Lister Jr. died in December 2020. Anthony Johnson, who played Izal, died in September 2021. With each passing year, the version of Last Friday people once imagined becomes harder to make.